It all started with an explosive demo in that suffocating boardroom. They cheered, they raised their glasses, they pounded their chests claiming victory, and me, the one who wrote every line of code, who laid the foundation for every feature of that app, was pushed aside like yesterday's garbage. They thought I'd stay silent, but they didn't know that buried deep in that contract, I'd planted a legal landmine, one wrong move, and their entire empire would crumble, by my own hand. My name is Emily Carter, and I've spent the last 2 years of my life building something that was supposed to change everything for the company, for the industry, and for me. But standing in that gleaming conference room at TechWave Solutions on launch day, watching everyone celebrate what they called their achievement, I realized I'd become invisible. The champagne flowed like water. Rick Dawson, my direct manager, stood at the center of it all, his tailored suit catching the light as he raised his glass for the third toast in 20 minutes. "To the future of data analytics," he bellowed, his face flushed with triumph and expensive whiskey. The room erupted in cheers. Marketing was there, sales was there, even the interns who joined last week were there, all basking in the glow of success. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Seattle skyline blur through the rain, my reflection ghost-like against the glass. 2 years, 730 days of debugging at 3 a.m, of solving problems that kept everyone else stumped, of architecting the entire backend that made our revolutionary app actually revolutionary. My fingers still ached from the marathon coding sessions. My eyes still burned from the endless lines of code that I'd refined until they sang like poetry. The app was beautiful, I had to admit. The dashboard gleamed on the massive screen behind Rick, real-time data flowing like digital blood through its veins. Every algorithm, every function, every elegant solution to impossible problems, I knew them all intimately, because I'd birthed them from nothing. The predictive analytics engine that everyone was raving about, that was my baby. Conceived during a sleepless weekend when everyone else had given up. The seamless API integration that made our competitors weep, I'd fought for that, argued for that, and then built it with my bare hands when they finally gave me the green light. "Emily," someone called out. It was Sarah from HR, waving me over with a plastic smile. "Come join the photo. We need the whole team." The whole team. I walked over, my heels clicking against the polished floor, and positioned myself at the edge of the group, in the photo that would later grace our company website, our LinkedIn pages, and the tech blogs that couldn't stop talking about us. I'm barely visible a shoulder, half a face, easily cropped out. The presentation began, and I watched Rick click through slides I'd created, explaining technical architecture I'd designed, demonstrating features I'd sweated blood to perfect. Not once did my name leave his lips. The crowd nodded along, impressed by Rick's vision and the leadership team's innovative approach. My stomach turned, but I kept my expression neutral, professional. I'd learned long ago that showing emotion in this boys' club was a sign of weakness. "The real genius," Rick was saying, his voice booming with false modesty, "was recognizing that the market was ready for this level of sophistication. We saw an opportunity and we seized it. Such a convenient word, so beautifully vague. It could mean anything, include anyone, erase anyone. I remembered the night I'd cracked the core algorithm, alone in the office at 2:45 in the morning, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled notes. I'd literally cried when it finally worked, tears of exhaustion and joy streaming down my face as I ran test after test, watching it perform flawlessly. I'd called Rick at home, waking him up to share the breakthrough. He'd mumbled something about good work and hung up. The next day, he'd presented it to the board as a team discovery. The party continued around me, a blur of congratulations and backslapping that I wasn't part of. I nursed a single glass of champagne, watching them celebrate my work, my innovations, my sleepless nights. The press release had already gone out. I'd seen it on my phone, 5 paragraphs about TechWave's triumph, quotes from Rick, from the CEO, from the head of product. My name appeared once, buried in a list of contributing team members at the very end. But they'd made one crucial mistake, in their arrogance, in their assumption that I was just another replaceable cog in their machine. They'd overlooked something. During those long nights when I was building their empire, I'd also been protecting myself. That contract with our API provider, the one Rick had barely glanced at before signing, contained my insurance policy. A single clause, carefully worded, legally binding. As I stood there, invisible in my own success story, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt transformed into something colder, sharper. They wanted to erase me, fine, but they'd forgotten that I was the architect of this entire system, and architects always keep the blueprints. The party would end soon, the hangover would come later, and when it did, they'd learn that the person they'd pushed aside wasn't just a coder, wasn't just an employee, wasn't just another woman in tech they could step on while climbing their ladder. I was the one holding the detonator. The Monday after launch weekend, I walked into Rick's corner office at exactly 9:30 in the morning. He was leaning back in his leather chair, feet up on his mahogany desk, scrolling through the glowing press coverage on his tablet. The Seattle Times, TechCrunch, Wired, we were everywhere. "Emily," he said without looking up, "shut the door." I did, then sat in the uncomfortable chair across from him, the one deliberately chosen to be lower than his, a power play as subtle as a sledgehammer. "Hell of a launch," he continued, finally setting down the tablet. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. "The numbers are exceeding projections by 40%. The board is ecstatic." "That's wonderful," I said, keeping my voice level. I wanted to discuss the bonus structure we talked about, the performance incentives that were promised after successful launch. His smile flickered, just for a second. "Ah, yes, about that." He pulled out a folder, thick with papers I recognized as my employment contract. "I've been reviewing your agreement with HR, and there's been a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. The word hung in the air like poison gas. "You see," he continued, his tone shifting to that patronizing cadence I'd heard him use with junior developers. "The bonus structure applies to senior management positions. Your role, while valuable, is classified as technical staff. Different tier, different compensation model." I felt my fingernails dig into my palms, but my face remained calm. "Rick, we discussed this explicitly. You promised?" "I suggested," he interrupted, holding up a finger, "that there might be opportunities for additional compensation based on performance. But promises, Emily, this is business. We don't work on promises. We work on contracts." The irony of that statement would come back to haunt him, but he didn't know it yet. "Furthermore," he continued, warming to his theme, "I need to address your visibility during the launch. Several board members commented that you seemed disconnected from the team celebration. In a collaborative environment like ours, that kind of behavior raises concerns." "Disconnected," I repeated, tasting the word like bile. "Look, I'm not saying you didn't contribute. Your coding was adequate. But let's be honest here. This success came from strategic vision, leadership, and business acumen. The technical implementation was just following the blueprint we provided. Adequate. My code that had solved 7 critical bottlenecks, my architecture that had reduced processing time by 90%, my innovation that had 3 pending patents. Adequate." "I understand," I said, standing up. "Crystal clear, actually." Rick's smile returned, broader now, thinking he'd won. "Glad we could clear that up. Oh, and Emily, the press wants to do a feature on the dev team. I'll need you to prepare some technical documentation for me to reference. Make sure it's accessible. You know how these journalists are with actual technology." I nodded, turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Rick, when you signed the API provider contract, did you read all the terms?" He waved dismissively. "That's what legal is for. Why?" "No reason. Just wondering about attention to detail when it comes to contracts." Back at my desk, I opened my personal laptop, the one that never touched the company network. In an encrypted folder labeled Insurance, I pulled up the document I'd been carefully maintaining for 6 months. Screenshots of promises made in Slack channels. Emails where Rick explicitly committed to the bonus structure. The original architecture documents with my name prominently displayed before they were mysteriously edited. And most importantly, the API contract with Quantum Solutions, our critical data provider. Page 47. Section 18.3.2. I'd insisted on adding it during negotiations, playing it off as a standard protection clause. Rick had been too busy taking credit for securing the partnership of the century to read the fine print. The clause was beautiful in its simplicity. The license for TechWave Solutions to use Quantum's API was contingent upon the primary technical architect, specifically named as Emily Carter, being compensated according to all written and verbal agreements made during the project development phase. It wasn't just about the money, though the $50,000 bonus would have been nice. It was about the erasure, the casual cruelty of taking someone's work and pretending they barely existed. It was about every woman in tech who'd been told her contributions were adequate, while watching mediocre men take victory laps on her innovations. I spent the rest of the day acting normal. I submitted my code reviews, attended the product roadmap meeting, even smiled when Rick announced to the team that he'd been invited to speak at the Global Tech Summit about his revolutionary approach to data architecture. Sarah from HR stopped by to hand me the official press packet, my name buried on page 12, listed after 2 interns who'd joined a month ago. "Exciting times," she chirped. "Absolutely," I agreed, thinking about the email I'd drafted but not yet sent to Quantum Solutions' legal department, asking them to review their contract compliance. That evening, as the office emptied and the celebration continued at some overpriced bar downtown, an event I wasn't invited to, naturally I sat at my desk, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay. The app's dashboard glowed on my screen, beautiful and functional, processing millions of data points per second. My creation, my baby, stolen and rebranded. They thought they'd won. They thought I'd accept the humiliation, the marginalization, the theft of my work with a smile and a thank you for the opportunity. They thought wrong. I pulled up the email to Quantum Solutions, my finger hovering over the send button. Not yet. First, I needed to document everything. Then, when the moment was right, I'd show them what happens when you build your castle on foundations you don't own. The office was dark now except for my desk lamp and the city lights beyond. Somewhere out there, Rick was probably on his 3rd martini, regaling investors with tales of his technical genius. Enjoy it while it lasts, I thought, closing my laptop. The countdown had begun. The memory hit me like lightning as I sat in my apartment that night, laptop open, staring at the Quantum Solutions contract. It had been 8 months ago. During the chaos of finalizing our API integration, everyone was focused on the technical specifications, the data flow rates, the pricing tiers. Rick was strutting around, boasting about his negotiation skills to anyone who'd listen. But I'd been thinking 3 moves ahead. The Quantum Solutions representative, James Liu, had been surprisingly receptive when I'd requested a private technical review session, just to ensure our architectures align. I'd explained. Rick had waved me off. Technical details were beneath him, that afternoon. In a small conference room with terrible coffee and flickering fluorescent lights, I'd planted my insurance policy. "This is unusual," James had said, reading through my proposed addition to Section 18.3.2. "You want to tie the license validity to your personal compensation status." "Not personal," I'd corrected carefully. "The primary technical architect's compensation. It's a safeguard against technical brain drain. If TechWave loses or fails to properly compensate the person who actually understands the integration, Quantum's API could be misused, potentially damaging both our reputations." James had studied me for a long moment. He was sharp. He knew there was more to this request. "And you're the primary technical architect." "I am. My name needs to be explicitly stated in the contract for this clause to have teeth." "This could give you significant leverage," he said slowly. "It could protect both our companies from technical disasters," I countered. "Imagine if I left tomorrow and someone incompetent took over the integration. Your API could be compromised. Data could be mishandled. This ensures TechWave has a vested interest in maintaining technical continuity." It was partially true, but we both knew the real reason. James had smiled then, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've seen too many talented engineers get burned by their companies." Consider it added. "But Emily, this clause has a hair trigger. If your compensation agreement is violated in any way, written or verbal, the license becomes invalid immediately. No grace period, no warnings." "I understand. I hope you never have to use it." "So do I." Back in the present, I pulled up the signed contract, zooming in on that beautiful clause. There it was, in black and white, with Rick's flourishing signature at the bottom. He'd signed it during a power lunch, probably 3 martinis in, certainly without reading it. The clause was even better than I'd remembered. Not only did it invalidate the license if I wasn't properly compensated, but it also included a poison pill. Any attempt to terminate my employment within 90 days of a compensation dispute would trigger an automatic audit of all data processed through the API, with results sent directly to Quantum's legal team and, more importantly, to all of TechWave's investors. I'd been paranoid then. Now I was grateful for my paranoia. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, one of the few developers who still treated me like a human being. "You seeing this?" He'd attached a link to Rick's LinkedIn post, a long self-congratulatory essay about his journey in creating the app, complete with professional photos of him standing thoughtfully in front of whiteboards covered with my diagrams. The rage that flooded through me was ice cold and crystal clear. This wasn't just about a stolen bonus anymore. This was about systematic erasure, about the casual assumption that they could take everything from me and I'd just disappear quietly. I opened a new document and began typing. Documentation of compensation agreements. Emily Carter, TechWave Solutions. First, the email from Rick, dated 6 months ago. "Emily, your dedication hasn't gone unnoticed. Post-launch bonus structure will reflect your crucial contributions. We're talking serious numbers here." Then the Slack message, marked with the little pin icon he'd used for important commitments. 50K minimum bonus after successful launch. You have my word. The team meeting recording where he'd announced, thinking the camera was off, that I was the only reason this project hasn't crashed and burned, and that I'd be taken care of when the money starts flowing. One by one, I compiled them. Emails, messages, recordings, screenshots. The folder grew thick with evidence, but the crown jewel was a video from the company's own security camera, a conversation in the hallway where Rick had explicitly promised me the bonus in front of 3 witnesses, all of whom had since mysteriously received their own bonuses to ensure their silence. At 2:15 in the morning, I finally stopped. The documentation was complete, comprehensive, damning, but I wasn't going to use it yet. Let them get comfortable. Let the app grow more essential to the company's valuation. Let them integrate it deeper into their infrastructure. Make promises to bigger clients. Become completely dependent on that Quantum Solutions API. I pulled up the app's analytics dashboard. Yes, I still had access, because Rick was too lazy to revoke permissions properly. User adoption was exceeding all projections. 3 Fortune 500 companies had already signed enterprise contracts. The company valuation had jumped 40% in a week. All built on a foundation that I could shatter with a single email. But not yet. First, I wanted them to understand what they'd done. I wanted Rick to feel that first tremor of fear when he realized his castle was built on sand. I wanted the board to understand that their golden boy had signed away their future without reading the fine print. I closed my laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Rick was probably sleeping soundly in his overpriced condo, dreaming of IPOs and magazine covers. Sleep well, Rick, I thought. The timer on your empire started ticking the moment you decided I was expendable. You just don't know it yet. Tomorrow, I'd go to work like nothing had changed. I'd smile, I'd code, I'd play the good soldier, but I'd also start leaving breadcrumbs, little hints that something wasn't quite right with the API contract. Nothing obvious, just enough to make the paranoid people in legal start asking questions. The weapon was loaded. My finger was on the trigger. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the perfect moment to pull it. The art of appearing normal while planning someone's professional destruction requires a particular kind of discipline. For 3 weeks after that confrontation with Rick, I became the model employee. I arrived at 8:45 every morning, left at 6:30 every evening. I contributed in meetings without overstepping, submitted my code reviews on time, and even brought donuts for the team on Friday. "You seem different," Marcus commented one afternoon, finding me in the break room calmly making tea. "More zen. Just focusing on what I can control," I replied, stirring honey into my cup with deliberate slowness. What I could control was everything, but they didn't need to know that yet. The beauty of my situation was that I didn't need to do anything dramatic. I just needed to continue being exactly what they'd relegated me to: invisible, competent, unthreatening. Meanwhile, the app's success was snowballing. We'd signed 2 more enterprise clients. The user base had doubled. Revenue projections for Q3 were astronomical. Rick had started wearing more expensive suits. He'd upgraded his car to a Tesla Model S, the one with all the features. His LinkedIn posts became increasingly insufferable, filled with thought leadership about disruption and innovation. He was invited to speak at conferences, to write guest articles, to join exclusive CEO roundtables. During one all-hands meeting, he actually said, "When I conceived this product, I knew it would change everything." I sat in the back row, taking notes on my phone that had nothing to do with his presentation. The first crack in my perfect facade came from an unexpected source. Janet from legal stopped by my desk on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a thick folder. "Emily, quick question. You worked on the quantum solutions integration, right?" "I built it, yes," I said carefully. She flipped through pages, frowning. "There's some unusual language in Section 18. Something about technical architect compensation. Legal's doing a routine audit of all our vendor contracts, and this one's weird." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "Oh, that. It was a protection clause Quantum insisted on. They wanted to ensure technical continuity. But it specifically names you." I was the only one who understood their API architecture at the time. They wanted guarantees that the integration would be properly maintained. Janet studied me over her reading glasses. She was sharp, one of the few people at TechWave who actually read documents before signing off on them. Unfortunately for Rick, she'd been on maternity leave when the contract was signed. "This clause. Emily, do you understand what this means? If you're not compensated according to your agreements, the entire license becomes invalid. Immediately." "I'm aware," I said, taking a sip of my tea. "And have you been compensated according to your agreements?" I let the silence stretch just long enough to be meaningful. "That's an interesting question. Janet?" She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly closed the folder. "I need to review this with outside counsel. Don't do anything without talking to me first. Okay." "I'm not planning to do anything at all," I said truthfully. I didn't need to. The bomb was already armed. That evening, I watched from my desk as Janet had a heated conversation with Rick in his office. His face went from confident to confused to pale in the span of 10 minutes. He kept gesturing wildly, pulling up documents on his computer, making phone calls. Janet left looking grim. An hour later, Rick appeared at my desk. "Emily, my office, now." I followed him, noting the sweat stains under his arms despite the aggressive air conditioning. "What did you do?" he hissed as soon as the door closed. "I'm going to need more context," I said, settling into the uncomfortable chair like it was a throne. "The quantum contract, Janet says there's a clause that could invalidate our license." "Oh, that? Yes. I insisted on that clause to protect the technical integrity of the integration. You signed it. Remember, during your power lunch at Canlis?" His face flushed. "You set me up." "I protected the company's interests. If the person who understands the integration isn't properly retained and compensated, the system could fail catastrophically. It's actually quite responsible when you think about it." "This is extortion." "This is contract law. You're the one who said we work on contracts, not promises. Remember." He slammed his hand on the desk. "You think you're clever? I could fire you right now." "You could," I agreed pleasantly. "Of course, that would immediately trigger the audit provision in subsection C. Quantum would be notified instantly, as would our investors. They'd want to know why the primary technical architect was terminated right after raising concerns about compensation agreements. The PR alone would be challenging." Rick's face cycled through several shades of red. "What do you want?" "Nothing," I said, standing up. "I want absolutely nothing from you. Rick, I'm just a technical staff member doing adequate work. Remember, I'm sure everything will work out fine." I left him there, staring at his desk like it might provide answers. Back at my workstation, I pulled up the app's dashboard. Beautiful numbers everywhere. Success metrics through the roof. All of it balanced on a knife's edge that I controlled. My phone buzzed. A text from Janet. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring everything. I smiled, typing back everything. Everything. That night, I backed up my insurance folder to 3 different secure locations. The silence before the storm was ending. Tomorrow, Janet would understand the full scope of what Rick had signed. Tomorrow, the countdown would accelerate. I looked at the motivational poster on the break room wall. The one about teamwork and communication. They should add one about reading contracts before you sign them, and maybe another about not stealing credit from the people who actually build your empire. The best part, I still hadn't done anything. I just existed, been professional, done my job. The weapon they'd given me through their own arrogance and negligence was doing all the work. The storm was coming, and I was the only one who'd brought an umbrella. The DevOps team noticed it first. During the Thursday morning stand-up, Kevin raised his hand, looking puzzled. Hey, did anyone modify the API authentication flow? I'm seeing some weird warnings in the logs. Everyone shook their heads. Rick, who'd started attending our technical meetings since his conversation with Janet, leaned forward. What kind of warnings? Nothing critical, Kevin said, pulling up his laptop. Just some notes about contract compliance verification from Quantum's side. Probably nothing. Rick's jaw tightened. Probably nothing isn't good enough. Figure it out. I kept my eyes on my screen, fingers moving steadily across the keyboard, writing code for a feature that would never see the light of day if things went according to plan. Kevin spent the morning digging through logs, occasionally muttering to himself. Around 11:30, he called out, "Found something. There's a validation check running every hour from Quantum servers. It's checking something in Section 18 of our contract." "What section?" asked David from the back-end team. "Something about compensation compliance for technical architects." Kevin frowned at his screen. Why would that be in an API contract? The room went quiet. I could feel Rick's eyes boring into the back of my head. "It's a standard protection clause," I said without looking up. "Quantum wanted to ensure technical continuity. Nothing to worry about if everything's above board." "But why is it running checks now?" Kevin persisted. "This started 3 days ago." 3 days ago, the day after Janet had started her investigation. "Maybe we should ask legal," David suggested. "Legal's handling it," Rick said quickly. Too quickly. "Focus on your own work." But the seed was planted. Developers are curious creatures by nature, and telling them not to investigate something is like telling a cat not to knock something off a table. By lunch, I heard whispers in the kitchen. "Did you see the clause Kevin found? Why would Emily's compensation be tied to our API access? Rick looks like he's about to have a stroke." Marcus found me in the server room that afternoon, pretending to check cable connections. "Emily," he said quietly, "what's really going on?" I looked at him, one of the few people who'd remained decent through all of this. "What do you think is going on?" "I think Rick screwed you on the launch bonus. I think you knew he would. And I think you protected yourself." I said nothing, adjusting a cable that didn't need adjusting. "Good for you," he whispered, then louder. "Yeah, these connections look solid. Must be a software issue." That evening, the entire dev team stayed late. Not because of deadlines, but because everyone sensed something massive was brewing. Pizza boxes accumulated in the break room. Energy drinks lined up on desks like soldiers. It felt like the night before a product launch. Except this time, the product was corporate drama. At 7:45, Janet returned to the office with 2 people I didn't recognize outside counsel, based on their suits that cost more than my monthly rent. They disappeared into the large conference room with Rick and our CEO, Margaret Walsh. Through the glass walls, we could see papers spreading across the table, fingers pointing at specific passages, Rick's increasingly animated gestures. $20 says Rick's getting fired, someone whispered. 50 says Emily owns the company by tomorrow, another voice added. I stayed at my desk, calmly refactoring code that didn't need refactoring. Every now and then, I'd glance at the conference room. Margaret's face had gone from concerned to furious. At one point, she threw a document at Rick. Actually threw it. At 9:15, Janet emerged and walked straight to my desk. The entire floor went silent. Emily, conference room, please. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked through the gauntlet of stairs. Someone actually started a slow clap before being shushed. The conference room smelled like fear and expensive cologne. Margaret sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled. Rick slouched in his chair like a deflated balloon. The lawyers flanked them like bookends. "Sit," Margaret commanded. I sat. "I've spent the last 3 hours reviewing this situation," she began, her voice arctic. "I've seen the contract. I've seen the communications Rick had with you regarding compensation. I've seen the bonus structure that was promised and not delivered." She paused, fixing Rick with a stare that could melt steel. "What I want to know, Emily, is what you want." I let the silence build. In negotiations, the first person to speak loses. "I want what was promised," I said finally. "Nothing more, nothing less. The 50,000 bonus, plus interest. It's been 3 weeks since it was due. Plus public acknowledgement of my role as primary architect. Plus guarantees that this won't happen again." Rick started to speak, but Margaret silenced him with a gesture. "And if we refuse?" I pulled out my phone, showing them an email drafted to James Liu at Quantum Solutions. The subject line read, "Contract compliance concern. Immediate action required." "Then I send this. Quantum runs their audit. They find TechWave in breach. The license is revoked. Every dashboard, every client installation, every process running through their API stops working. Today's Thursday. By Monday, we'd have lost every enterprise client. The investors would demand answers. The SEC might get curious about why material information about contract dependencies wasn't disclosed." Margaret's jaw clenched. "This is contract law," I interrupted. "Rick taught me that. We don't work on promises. We work on contracts." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Outside, the dev team had given up all pretense of working, openly staring through the glass walls. "Janet," Margaret said finally, "draft the paperwork. Emily gets everything she asked for. Rick, you're on administrative leave pending a full review of your management practices." Rick's face crumbled. "Margaret, you can't." "I can and I am. You signed a contract without reading it. You made promises you thought you could break. You tried to erase the person who built our entire product. Get out." He stood, looked at me with pure hatred, then stormed out. Through the glass, I could see the dev team scrambling back to their desks, trying to look busy. Margaret turned to me. "You could have destroyed us." "But I didn't." "You still could." "But I won't, as long as we understand each other." She nodded slowly. "We do. Janet will have the papers ready by tomorrow morning." I stood to leave, then paused. "Margaret, the next time someone builds something revolutionary for this company, maybe value them before they have to force you to." I walked out of the conference room to find the entire dev team standing, applauding. Not the sarcastic slow clap from earlier, but genuine appreciation. The storm hadn't fully hit yet. That would come tomorrow when the paperwork was signed, when Rick's removal was announced, when my name was finally attached to my work. But the wind had shifted. I sat back at my desk and closed the drafted email to Quantum without sending it. The weapon was still loaded, safety off, but finger removed from the trigger. For now. Friday morning arrived with an electric tension that made the air feel heavy. I'd barely slept, running through scenarios, preparing for the possibility that Margaret might renege on her promise, or that Rick might try some last-minute maneuver. But at 9 o'clock sharp, Janet appeared at my desk with a folder of documents and a genuine smile. "Ready to make this official?" she asked. The small conference room had been prepared like a surgical theater, documents laid out in precise order. Multiple pens available, a notary standing by. Margaret was already there, looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Her usually perfect hair had a strand out of place. Her blazer was the same one from yesterday, wrinkled now. "Before we begin," Margaret said, "I need to understand something. When did you plan this?" I sat down, accepting the coffee Janet offered. "I didn't plan anything. I protected myself. There's a difference. The clause in the quantum contract was insurance. I hoped I'd never need it." Margaret laughed bitterly. "Insurance. You turned our entire infrastructure into a dead man's switch. Rick turned it into that when he broke his promises. I just built the switch." She nodded slowly, then pushed the first document toward me. "Your bonus? $50,000 plus 3% interest calculated from the original due date. The check will be cut today. I signed. Second, public acknowledgement. She slid over a press release draft. My name was in the first paragraph. Emily Carter, the primary architect and lead developer of TechWave's revolutionary data analytics platform. It went on to detail my contributions, my innovations, my 2 years of dedication. This goes out Monday. This afternoon, we're also updating all previous materials to reflect accurate attribution. I signed again. Third, your go-forward compensation package. This document was thicker. Senior Principal Engineer title, 30% base salary increase, guaranteed annual bonuses tied to product performance, and stock options vesting over 4 years. I read every line, every clause, every footnote. Janet waited patiently while Margaret fidgeted. There's one thing missing, I said. Margaret's face tightened, which is a board observer seat when product decisions are discussed. That's not. The quantum contract is still active, I reminded her quietly. I'm still the named technical architect. I'd like to ensure that role is respected moving forward. Margaret looked at Janet, who shrugged. It's unusual but not unprecedented, given the circumstances. Fine, Margaret bit out. Janet, add it. While Janet updated the documents, Margaret studied me. You could have been vindictive. You could have destroyed Rick publicly, humiliated the company, tanked our valuation. That would have hurt everyone, including the team that actually supported me. Marcus, Kevin, the engineers who do real work. Why should they suffer because Rick's an ass? Rick's finished in this industry. You know that. Right words already spreading. I thought about feeling guilty, but the emotion wouldn't come. He did that to himself. The final documents were ready by 10:30. I signed them all. Watched Margaret and Janet add their signatures. Watched the notary make everything official. When it was done, I held a check for $51,500 and a new employment contract that actually valued what I brought to the table. Now, Margaret said, standing, we need to address the team. The rumors are getting out of control. The main floor fell silent as we emerged. Every developer, every designer, every product manager was watching. Margaret walked to the center of the open office, and I noticed Rick's things had already been boxed up and removed from his corner office. Team, Margaret began, I want to address the changes happening at TechWave, effective immediately. Rick Dawson is no longer with the company. His departure is related to management practices that don't align with our values. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. More importantly, I want to correct a grave oversight. The success of our platform is due to the exceptional work of Emily Carter, who served as primary architect and lead developer. Her innovations, dedication, and technical expertise are the foundation of everything we've built. Effective immediately, Emily is promoted to senior principal engineer and will have a significant voice in our technical direction moving forward. The applause was immediate and genuine. Marcus actually whooped. Kevin started chanting, "Emily, Emily," before others joined in. I felt my face flush, but this time it wasn't from anger or frustration. It was from something I hadn't felt in months: recognition. Margaret continued, outlining structural changes to prevent similar situations, but I stopped listening. My phone was buzzing with messages. The press release had gone live, and LinkedIn was exploding. Tech reporters were reaching out. Recruiters from competitors were suddenly very interested in my journey. But the message that mattered most came from James Liu at Quantum Solutions. Saw the news. Glad you didn't need to pull the trigger. The clause remains active. Consider it your permanent insurance policy. Also, we're launching a new ML initiative. Interested in consulting? That afternoon, as I was setting up my new office, yes, they gave me Rick's corner office. Margaret stopped by one last time. The board wants to know if the quantum situation is fully resolved. I looked up from arranging my desk, where I'd placed a small framed printout of Section 18.32. As long as everyone keeps their promises, there's nothing to worry about. That sounds like a threat. It sounds like contract law, I corrected. Something this company now takes very seriously. She left without another word. As 5 o'clock approached and people started leaving for the weekend, many stopped by to congratulate me, to share their own stories of being overlooked, to thank me for standing up. The dev team invited me to drinks to celebrate, and for the first time in months, I said yes. But first, I had one more thing to do. I pulled up the app's dashboard, our beautiful creation processing millions of data points, serving thousands of clients, generating millions in revenue. In the credits section that no one ever read, I updated a single line. Primary architect Emily Carter. It was a small change. Most users would never notice it, but it was there, in the code, in the foundation, where it always should have been. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. From Rick's My Corner office, I could see the entire city spread out below. Somewhere out there. Rick was probably drinking himself into oblivion, crafting LinkedIn posts about learning experiences and new chapters. Let him. I had code to write, systems to build, and a team that finally knew who really built their castle. The insurance policy remained loaded, locked away but ready, because in tech, like in life, you never know when someone might try to steal your work again. But next time, they'd know better than to try it with Emily Carter. Saturday night, 11:47 p.m. I was home in my pajamas, halfway through a glass of wine and a Netflix series, when my phone exploded with notifications, not the gentle buzz of a text or two, but the violent cascade of something going catastrophically wrong. Marcus called first. "Emily, check Slack. Check it now." I pulled up my laptop, and my blood went cold. The emergency channel was flooded with screenshots. Every single client dashboard was displaying the same message in angry red text. License invalid. Contact account holder. The app was dead. Completely, utterly dead. My phone rang again. Margaret. I could hear panic in her voice before she even spoke. "Emily, the system's down. Everything. Every client. It's showing license invalid." "I see it," I said, already pulling up the Quantum Solutions admin panel. "Did you—" "No," I cut her off. "I didn't do anything. I'm checking now." My hands flew across the keyboard, diving into logs, checking authentication tokens, verifying contract status. Everything looked normal on our end. Then I saw a system message from Quantum, timestamped 11:32 p.m. Automated compliance check. Failed primary technical architect compensation status cannot be verified. License suspended pending resolution. "Emily!" Margaret's voice was sharp. "What's happening?" I dug deeper, into the authentication logs, and found the problem. Someone tried to modify my employee record in the system. Tonight, at 11:28, they attempted to change my status from active to terminated. Silence, then. That's impossible. Only HR and senior management have that access. "Pull the access logs," I said, already knowing what we'd find. Minutes later, Margaret called back. "Rick, that bastard still had admin credentials. He logged in from his home IP and tried to terminate you in the system." The irony was delicious. Rick had tried to fire me posthumously, probably thinking it would invalidate my claims or create chaos. Instead, he'd triggered the very nuclear option he'd feared. "The quantum system detected the termination attempt," I explained, "and interpreted it as a compensation violation. It's an automatic trigger. The license suspended immediately." "Can you fix it?" I could. The question was whether I should. Not immediately. Anyway. "I need to contact James Liu at Quantum. But Emily, it's midnight on Saturday." "Then we have a problem." Within an hour, the situation had escalated beyond anything Rick could have imagined. 3 Fortune 500 clients called Margaret directly, furious about the outage. Our biggest investor was threatening to sue. Tech reporters, apparently never sleeping, had started tweeting about TechWave's mysterious system failure. Our stock price would crater when markets opened Monday. Margaret called an emergency meeting at the office. By 1:15 in the morning, the entire leadership team had assembled, along with most of the dev team who'd responded to frantic calls. Everyone looked haggard, panicked, still in whatever they'd been wearing when the calls came. "How bad is it?" asked David from the board, who'd dialed in via video. "Every client is affected," Margaret reported. "We're looking at potential losses in the millions per hour." "Can't we just revert whatever Rick did?" I shook my head. "The trigger is on Quantum's side. Once their system detects a violation, it requires manual intervention from their legal team to restore access. Then call them. I've left 6 messages, I said. James Liu is in Hawaii for his anniversary. His OOO message says he's back Monday. The room erupted in arguments, blame, panic. Someone suggested suing Rick. Someone else suggested suing Quantum. A few people, inexplicably, suggested suing me. Finally, Margaret slammed her hand on the table. Emily, there has to be something you can do. I stood, walked to the whiteboard, and started writing. There is, but you're not going to like it. I outlined our options. 1. Wait until Monday, lose millions, possibly lose the company too. Try to hack around Quantum's system illegal. Wouldn't work anyway. 3. Implement the emergency backup plan I'd built. What backup plan? Margaret asked. The one I created in case something like this happened. A secondary data pipeline that doesn't rely on Quantum. It's not as robust, not as fast, but it works. Then why aren't we using it? Because, I said, turning to face them, I built it on my own time, with my own resources. It's my intellectual property, not TechWave's. The room went silent. You're extorting us, David said from the screen. I'm offering you a solution, but this time, we're going to do things right. Full contract, up front. I pulled up a document on my laptop, projecting it on the screen. A licensing agreement for my backup system. The terms were aggressive, but not unreasonable immediate payment of $200,000, plus 5% of all revenue generated while using the system, plus a written apology from Rick Dawson to be published in 3 major tech publications. The apology is non-negotiable, I added. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed glass. This is Tuesday, I interrupted. By Tuesday morning, you'll have lost more than what I'm asking. Every hour you debate is costing you approximately $300,000 in lost revenue and penalties. At 2:45 in the morning, they signed. By 3:30, I deployed my backup system. It wasn't pretty, it ran at about 60% efficiency compared to Quantum's API, but dashboards started flickering back to life. The red error messages disappeared, replaced by data flowing again. The dev team worked through the night, optimizing, patching, stabilizing. By sunrise, we had most clients back online. The crisis was contained, though barely. Sunday afternoon, James Liu called me back, having seen the chaos from his beach hotel. Emily, what the hell happened? I explained Rick's sabotage attempt. Jesus, do you want me to restore the license? Eventually, but let them sweat a little longer. They need to understand that their infrastructure isn't just code and servers, it's people. And when you screw over the people, the infrastructure fails. Brutal, but fair. I'll restore it Tuesday morning. Perfect. Rick was arrested Sunday evening for criminal unauthorized access to computer systems. His mugshot made the tech blogs by Monday morning. The headlines wrote themselves, "Fired tech execs revenge hack costs company millions." But the real victory came Monday afternoon, when the written apology appeared in TechCrunch, Wired, and the Wall Street Journal. I, Rick Dawson, formally apologized to Emily Carter for attempting to claim credit for her work, for denying her rightful compensation, and for attempting to sabotage TechWave's systems out of spite. Her brilliance built our platform, and my ego nearly destroyed it. By Tuesday, when Quantum's license was restored and systems returned to full capacity, I'd made more from one weekend than Rick had stolen from me in bonuses. The backup system licensing fees alone would generate passive income for years. But the sweetest victory, the email from our biggest client. We want to work directly with Emily Carter on all future implementations. She's the only one we trust. Trust, built with code, enforced with contracts, and defended with the kind of preparation that only comes from knowing exactly how vulnerable you are in a world that tries to erase you. The castle hadn't crumbled, but everyone now knew who really held the keys to the kingdom. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where everything had unraveled, but this time, I was on the other side of the table. The sunlight streaming through the windows hit differently when you weren't fighting for recognition. It felt warmer, somehow, less harsh. The offer is $3.2 million, Margaret said, sliding the acquisition papers across to me, for full rights to your backup system and ongoing consulting. A competing firm, NextGen Analytics, wanted my emergency solution that had saved TechWave. They'd seen how it performed under pressure, how it had kept a major platform alive when everything else failed. They wanted that resilience. 3.5, I countered, and I retained the right to implement variations for other clients. Margaret smiled a real smile this time, not the corporate grimace I'd grown used to. You've learned well. I had excellent teachers. They showed me exactly what not to do. The deal closed at $3.4 million. As I signed the papers, I thought about that night 6 months ago when I'd sat at my desk, invisible and overlooked, plotting my insurance policy. I'd never imagined it would lead here. TechWave had changed dramatically since the incident. They'd implemented mandatory contract reviews, transparent attribution policies, and actual consequences for management failures. Rick's spectacular implosion had become a cautionary tale told at business schools and tech conferences. The Dawson disaster. They called it a perfect storm of ego, ignorance, and underestimating the person who built your house of cards. Rick himself had become a ghost in the industry. Last I heard, he was working at his brother-in-law's insurance firm in Toledo, about as far from Silicon Valley as you could get, without leaving the country. His LinkedIn profile had been scrubbed clean. But the internet never forgets. Every few weeks, someone would resurrect his apology letter in a thread about toxic tech culture. The Quantum Solutions contract remained active, still tied to my compensation, still protecting me. James Liu and I had become friends of sorts, bonding over coffee and war stories about corporate stupidity. He'd offered me a position at Quantum twice, but I'd turned him down. I had bigger plans. 2 weeks after the acquisition deal closed, I founded my own firm, Carter Technical Solutions. Our tagline, built on transparency, secured by trust. Within a month, I'd hired Marcus, Kevin, and 3 other developers from TechWave who'd witnessed everything and wanted to work somewhere that valued what they built. Margaret called me the day our incorporation was announced. You're poaching my team. I'm offering them what you should have: respect, attribution, and fair compensation. If that's poaching, then you need to re-examine your retention strategy. She laughed, actually laughed. You know, Emily, in another life, we could have been good partners. In another life, you would have valued me from the start. The call ended cordially. Business, not personal. Though everything in business is personal when it's your work being stolen. My company's first client, TechWave. They needed custom integration work, and Margaret knew better than to trust anyone else with their infrastructure. The contract negotiations were beautiful, every clause scrutinized, every term explicit, every contributor named. It took 3 weeks to finalize, and it was bulletproof. During the signing ceremony, yes, they made it a ceremony. Someone from the board asked me, "How did you know to protect yourself so thoroughly?" I thought about all the women in tech who'd been erased, all the developers who'd built empires only to be written out of history, all the quiet brilliance dismissed as adequate, while mediocrity took victory laps. I didn't know, I said. I just knew that in this industry, especially as a woman, your work can be stolen as easily as breathing. The only defense is to make the theft so costly that even the most arrogant executive would think twice. The room was uncomfortable with that truth, but truth doesn't need to be comfortable. A year later, at the annual Tech Innovation Awards, I stood on stage accepting the Pioneer in Software Architecture Award, the same stage where Rick had planned to present his creation before his world imploded. In my acceptance speech, I thanked my team, my mentors, and everyone who taught me the importance of reading contracts before signing them. The audience laughed, not knowing the full story, but in the front row, I saw Margaret nodding, Janet smiling, and my team from Carter Technical Solutions applauding. I ended my speech with this: innovation doesn't happen in corner offices or boardrooms. It happens at 2:45 in the morning when someone refuses to give up on a problem. It happens in the minds and hands of people who are often invisible, undervalued, and overlooked. My success isn't just mine. It belongs to every developer who's been told their work is adequate while watching someone else claim their brilliance. Document everything. Know your worth, and never, ever, let them erase you. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Later, at the afterparty, a young developer approached me, nervous and excited. "Ms. Carter, I'm in a situation similar to what you experienced. My manager is taking credit for my algorithm. What should I do? I handed her my business card. Call me Monday. And in the meantime, check your contracts. Check them very, very carefully. She nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Another invisible architect who wouldn't stay invisible for long. I stood on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. My city now in a way it hadn't been before. The same skyline, but I saw it differently. Not from the outside looking in, but from a throne I'd built myself. One line of code and one carefully written contract at a time. My phone buzzed. A message from James Liu. Saw your speech. Still got that clause active. I texted back, always. Insurance policies don't expire. Good. Hey, we're working on something revolutionary. Want in. Send me the contract. I'll have my team review every single word. He replied with a laughing emoji and a thumbs up. The truth about revenge is that the best kind isn't loud or violent or sudden. It's quiet, legal, and devastating. It's turning their own weapons against them. It's using their arrogance as the rope they hang themselves with. They stole my idea. They tried to erase me. But I held the keys to the kingdom they built on my foundation. And in the end, that made all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment, and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of sweet corporate revenge, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Have you ever experienced something similar in your workplace? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments.